In this Wolcen build guide, we're going to be covering a beginner melee caster hybrid build that focuses on the use of Aether damage and the Stasis ailment, dealing incredible AoE damage. Wolcen has a complex passive skill tree, Gate of Fates, that can be difficult to figure out, and many mechanics are not always easy to min-max. In this build guide, I'll explain how to get the most from this build, and if you've been struggling to find a good hybrid melee caster build, then this guide is for you. The Stasis Knight uses a combination of melee skills and one really good AoE spell, Anomaly. In order to cast this spell and still use melee skills, you have to use a catalyst in your offhand, which will reduce your melee damage. However, you gain an extremely strong spell in Anomaly and one that can set stasis on enemies. Stasis slows enemy movement and attack speed, protecting you and keeping them inside your devastating AoEs. When combat begins, you'll open with your rage skills and then drop Anomaly once you've built up some willpower. Because we take the passive skill Furious Appetite, rage is recovered over time instead of willpower, making this possible. Since this build leans more to the melee side of things than spellcasting, we can get away with little willpower, and Anomaly is a great way to dump it, building up more rage. You should never need to basic attack with this build, and it's one of the more dynamic builds I've tested so far. The Stasis Knight is a melee build, and that means you need to invest a good amount of points into toughness to keep yourself alive. Additionally, you'll want ferocity to increase your critical chance, since critical damage is one of the best ways to increase your damage in Wolcen. It doesn't matter which of these is your primary or secondary stats, but you'll want to keep these values fairly similar. Later on in the game, you can invest into Wisdom to get some more status ailment chance when diminishing returns start to have a larger impact. You want to create the stasis ailment as often as possible in order to benefit from the passive skill, which time cannot heal, which reapplies damage to enemies afflicted with the ailment after 1.5 seconds. This is a lot of damage, so even a few percentage points increase can go a long way. In this section, we'll take a look at what skills should be on your skill bar to make this build work. Unlike other builds, this one needs nearly all the right skills to work, so you want to get them ASAP. These are Bleeding Edge. This skill's damage might be the highest in the game, and it does insane AoE damage that just keeps getting stronger and stronger. Once you have the Unstoppable Momentum skill modifier, you'll notice a huge increase in damage, and you'll never unslot it. It also builds rage much faster than other versions, and you can drop several at once, stacking damage. The one downside is that it seems to remove Aether damage from the skill, which I think is a bug and will be changed in a future update. Be sure to grab a Taste of Blood for lifesteal that will help keep you alive, and Self-Adjusting Principle for a much faster blade that will hit enemies faster. Anomaly. This spell's damage is just impressive and works exceptionally well for any build that utilizes AoEs. It pulls enemies inward, grouping them into a tight ball while dealing damage over time, and can apply the stasis ailment due to its Aether damage type. You'll use this as soon as you've built up some willpower to dump it quickly, allowing you to keep casting Bleeding Edge. The only downside to this skill is its extremely long cooldown, which means that you will absolutely need cooldown reduction on your gear and in your passive skills. Taking the skill modifier Rending of Matter will allow you to cast this skill twice per cooldown, which helps tremendously and makes it a must for this build. You can almost use this at will later in the game if you have good cooldown reduction because of this one modifier. I like to take passives that increase the duration and size for more effectiveness, and these are Dislocating Threads and Temporal Dilation. Additionally, I like to grab Event Horizon to further damage enemies at the moment the spell is cast. Tracker's Reach. This ability is amazing for pulling you to the enemy and allowing you to get close for Bleeding Edge, but gets really good later on when you take the Arresting Claw skill modifier that applies stasis to all enemies it grabs. Additionally, you can take the Unrelenting Hunt skill modifier and it will pull in all enemies near you in a 360-degree arc, although at a smaller range. This applies stasis on all these enemies and packs them tightly around you, which is perfect. Bulwark of Dawn. This ability is great because when you have all the enemies bottled up, you can stay in one place and heal yourself to keep on swinging. Regular melee builds cannot use this because they cannot cast spells, so this is an advantage. Additionally, if you take the Sacred Ground skill modifier, it does damage over time as well, giving you another dot to stack on enemies. Juggernaut. We don't really need another attack skill, so this one works well on the defensive side to help keep you alive. Pop this when surrounded or face-to-face with a boss to prevent massive damage. It also uses rage and grants willpower, helping you to cast Anomaly more frequently when you aren't completely surrounded or attacking. Figuring out how to align your Gate of Fates is one, if not the hardest part of making a build in Wolcen, and generally takes a respec or two before you get it right. In this section, I want to show you how to set this up for maximum performance. Soldier. Soldier is first, and you want to take Heavy Blows and Zealous Might for critical damage and just damage in general. Make sure to grab the wild card in the 3 nodes next to it for further increased critical chance, and don't forget to grab Quick Draw for the cooldown reduction. Assassin. Once an Assassin, you'll want to head for Merciless Lethality immediately. This will give you a whopping plus 100% critical damage in exchange for minus 30% damage on non-crits. That might seem like an extreme trade-off, But remember, minus 30% is additive and critical damage is multiplicative. This is a huge damage boost on critical hits immediately. Then you'll continue your way straight through to the middle of Assassin, getting over to Child of Fury as quickly as possible. Child of Fury. Child of Fury contains probably the most important passive for this build in the skill Furious Appetite. This one ability changes the whole dynamic of the build, allowing you to regain rage instead of willpower, allowing you to use melee skills more often. This pushes you immediately to the melee side of a hybrid build, which is right where you want to be. Up until this point, you'll likely have difficulty dumping your willpower. Get there ASAP, even taking passives that increase fire damage just to make it quickly. Kabbalist. Once that passive has been taken, you're going to bounce through to the other side of Assassin to Kabbalist just to pick up Grievous Afflictions. This will allow you to place more ailments than one with each skill, which works well since you'll likely have multiple damage types for each. This is all you need here, though you can take Tormentor if you want. Timeweaver. After Kabbalist comes Timeweaver, which contains some great passives in Wither and Dreams, which increases Aether damage and you can take several times. Additionally, Which Time Cannot Heal is contained here, and that will drastically increase your damage to enemies that have stasis. Dire Junction is a great tanking skill and works well when you'll be taking big hits. Captured Velocity is just nice to have, and will trigger often, so there's no reason not to grab it. Warmonger. Last we head over through Kabbalist to Warmonger. You immediately want to go for Bestial Fury to gain increased damage for each nearby enemy, grab Take All Challengers, and Battlefield Predator to make it even better. There are tons of great passives in this tree, and you can spend 15 plus points here easily. Feast for the Crows is great for survival, and so are Terror of Flesh and Blood Offering. In this section, we'll be covering the type of equipment that you want for the Stasis Knight build. You'll need a one-handed weapon and a catalyst. You need the catalyst to use Anomaly, so this isn't optional. You want to look for weapons and catalysts that have plus flat amounts of Aether damage on them if possible. If not, any sort of occult damage is okay, and these include Sacred and Shadow damage. You'll want to have it both on attack and spellcast if possible. Make sure that your weapon has 3 offensive slots, ideally at 1, 2, and 3. This will allow you to add Aether damage to your weapon, spells, and add stasis duration if you use ambers in these slots. Make sure to head over to Xanafer Stark and reroll slots until you have a good combination. On your armor and accessories, you'll primarily be concerned with flat damage increases to Aether damage, cooldown reduction, occult damage, critical damage, and critical chance. You want to select armor types that contain high amounts of resistance so that you mitigate damage taken to you, and as you get further into the game, you'll need to start prioritizing these values a bit more above the other stats if you find that you're dying. You'll also want Support 2 sockets for increased Aether damage, and Defensive 1 for increased health regeneration. Final tips. Focus on occult damage early on in the game when it's harder to find good items that specifically have Aether damage. You will not gain the passives that grant plus % Aether damage until much later in the game anyway, so any type of occult is fine early on. Remember to level up skills using extra Primordial Affinity at Demetra. Players have a tendency to hold on to it and not do anything with it when they could be using it to unlock extra skill modifier points for their skills, and skills only get stronger and stronger, so level it up manually when you have extra Primordial Affinity. Make sure you unsocket gems from your old weapons and armor before selling them. You'll want the Ambers and Amethysts for Aether damage and increased critical damage. These are not always easy to find, so there's no point in wasting them. Better to lose a bit of gold than to have to farm an hour to get one. Lastly, make sure to keep items that have plus flat values of damage, even if they are elemental damage types, because they will still add damage to your weapon or anomaly. You'll have some plus fire damage percentage from the Indignation passive in Child of Fury, so that is the next best type of damage you should look for. Regardless though, it's generally best to use the item that has the highest flat damage increase, regardless of type. Be sure to check out our other Wolcen Lords of Mayhem guides and stay tuned for more builds, including beginner and endgame builds such as the Wolcen Mage build Oracle of Flames or the Ranger White Arrow build.